Welcome to University of the West, a private, nonprofit Buddhist-affiliated university located on 11 beautiful acres of hillside outside of Los Angeles, California. University of the West was founded upon the values of character, compassion, and community.
Good morning, Dr. Lancaster, and good morning to our abbot Huidong, and of course, good morning to everyone here, ladies and gentlemen. It's a good morning, right? Good warm weather. Today, I think it's a very good time for us to have some mindfulness. As you know, Dr. Lancaster was the former president of the University of the West. And also, the most important thing, he has been teaching and giving lectures for, I think, will be 40 years or over 40 years. I can approve that because when I was young, when I studied in Foshan Buddhist College, he traveled to Foshan and gave us lectures. I remember he taught us the Diamond Sutra. And his first question to us was that, you know what dana means? Dana, we have so many answers about that. Contemplation, meditation, and consideration, and of course, nowadays we have the usual and most general term is mindfulness. Mindfulness is good to practice in our daily life. So today is Dr. Lancaster's second lecture. It's about, I think the title is over here, Meditation and Mindfulness in Daily Expression. So let's welcome Dr. Lancaster to give us his second lecture here. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always nice to be with former students. That was a very nice class years and years ago at Sangha College there at Foguanshan, and all of those young nuns who took that course are now leading the organization. So they've all become very important people. Abbot Huidong, thank you for coming this morning. Well, I want to talk to you today about a development which has been sweeping the world. And it's an aspect of Buddhist practice which has exceeded anybody's expectations, I would say, in terms of the number of people involved. It's also an indication to me of several questions and challenges, as always. When anything sweeps, it gets big. How do you control it? How do you deal with it? How do you have some control when so many people are involved? So I use this first slide. If you can see, I should have made it bigger. A typical Korean monastery, out in the mountains, remote, small, is one aspect of Buddhism. But the Google campus has now become a second aspect. Google may be reaching out and touching far more people with regard to a Buddhist practice than any monastery. What do we do? What is the world coming to when a company with its massive outreach to the world that has contact with millions of people who starts dealing with a Buddhist practice? What does that mean, and what is its future? when I've talked to people at Google, it's very interesting. They say, well, if you're not getting 20 million hits an hour, you're probably too small for us to be interested. And those of us who normally work with the usual computer page, you know, we're delighted if we get 300 or 400 hits a day, and we think, wow, people all over the world are looking at what I do. So what happens when this has begun to develop? When the people at Google brought in Thich Nhat Hanh, very famous Vietnamese monk who has a center in France, brought him in and decided to initiate a program using his ideas and his form of meditation. And that's exactly what we see with this. So here we have something like a high-tech Google campus as opposed to this remote Korean monastery, which contains the future for Buddhism. This is our question. I have to tease him a little bit. Alex Amos has just walked in. I'm praising your company, Alex. Alex is a senior engineer at Google. Welcome. After Thich Nhat Hanh's visit to Google, one of their engineers became very interested in mindfulness and meditative practice. And he became so involved in it that finally Google has just said, why don't you do this full time? Just initiate into our workplace mindfulness practice. And so he's developed this program called Search Inside Yourself. Search Inside Yourself started out on the Google campus, and now they are spreading it and making it available worldwide. If you are at Google, you can go to a mindfulness lunch. You can go and have a lunch where nobody speaks. It's mindful. Or if you feel like you need some exercise, you can go out to their meditation maze and do walking meditation on the grounds through their maze and have a mindfulness walk. This Search Inside Yourself is now being made available around the world, and that's going to involve thousands of people, maybe even tens of thousands, who will make use of this as a form of practice. So I'm just pointing out that what we have in the world is this very new thing. There's also a conference which has become really popular, Wisdom 2.0. They have 2,000 people who gather at the conference. I had to be amused because somebody in the San Francisco Chronicle after Wisdom 2.0 lecture said, this is like a business get-together with a light dusting of Buddhism. So what do you do when business people get together to say, how can we do our job better? How can we be better bosses? How can we be better employees? How can we be more productive? And you give it a dusting of Buddhism. It's some of the speeches that are given are really inspirational. It is a very powerful conference, and it grows every year. We have Facebook, so that one of the key engineering people in Facebook has developed his idea that if we want to do a good job at Facebook, we need to be innovative, we need to be mindful, and we have to have a purpose behind our work. And so he is devoting himself to trying to include in everything which Facebook employees do the idea that they practice some form of mindfulness. And the reason for this is, you could say, not very, I don't want to put it down. It can be, it's done for the benefit of the company. Let's put it that way. There's nothing wrong with having things done for the benefit of the company, nothing at all. But here is this large organization that is touching hundreds of millions of people with its program, and it's saying if we want to do a better job of this, we need some form of practice of this mindfulness, and that we need to have our people do it, and we need to encourage our staff to practice some form of this. Evans Williams, who started Twitter, recently resigned as the CEO, and it's now run by somebody else. But people who know him say that one of the reasons why Evans made the decision to step down was not that he was doing a bad job, because Twitter obviously is one of the really successful companies. But when he started doing mindfulness practice, that has become more important to him than running a company. And that he is devoting himself more and more to the mindfulness type of practice. So that Twitter also is encouraging all of its employees to participate in some form of this practice. So, of all the places in the world that you would say, where is the place where Buddhism is suddenly going to erupt in the Western world and affect the lives of thousands of people? Say that probably you would be extremely smart to have come up and said Silicon Valley. Most of us would have said Buddhist monasteries, Buddhist groups, the Buddhists themselves, the Dalai Lama, somebody else, and Master Shingon, and whoever you might think will be the person. And those are all important people, and they are certainly not to be discounted in what's happening. But here, the place that this is suddenly emerged is at the high-tech level, right at the cutting edge of technology. Just to indicate how important this has become, John Kabat-Zinn is at the MIT, and he gave a talk on YouTube, maybe you've seen it even, and his talk on YouTube about mindfulness has already attracted like 2.5 million viewers. That's a large audience for any lecture. He is operating on the basis that there is absolutely neurological proof that mindfulness does wonderful things for you. And that's his research. He is a neuroscientist. He is proving with all of his research that people who are mindful or who do some form of mindfulness practice do better at all levels and at all ages even. The work that's being done with Centers for Mindfulness Study are everywhere growing in our universities. There's a center now at the University of California at San Diego. University of Pennsylvania has one. University of Wisconsin is doing a lot of work with this, Boston University, and these are just to name some of the big names where mindfulness centers have become a real part of campus activity and campus life and campus training and research. It is no longer something which I would say is peripheral or even outside the mainstream. These sorts of universities opening themselves up to this type of research says it's become mainstream. So it's not just the high-tech industry at all, it is also academics. The academics and people who are using the best forms of scientific research, primarily in neuroscience, who are working with this are in major institutions around the world. And it's not just the US. Cambridge has a Center for Mindfulness Studies, as does Oxford, and Exeter, and Bangor, which is the University of Wales. All of these major institutions in England are perhaps even more in the lead than the groups here in the United States. So it's not something that's just localized somehow to California or to the US. This is a worldwide phenomenon of academic institutions beginning to study what happens when you meditate, what happens when you are mindful, and it's happening to them. Lisa Simpson syndrome. 11 years ago, Lisa Simpson, this is of course a major public television, not public television, it's on normal television, a major program, been going for a very long time, has devoted fans. 11 years ago, I couldn't believe it. This program that's on major television made a decision that Lisa, who is the daughter of the Simpson family, would turn her back on Christianity, say it doesn't work for me, and become converted to Buddhism on the television show. She became converted to Buddhism. She is still a Buddhist. And in order to teach her about Buddhism, they got Richard Gere to come and do the voiceover. So Richard Gere came on and taught Lisa Simpson what she knows about Buddhism. And she's still a Buddhist on the program. So I was really interested when I was going through the internet to find this one internet person who would put up what I know about Buddhism. And mainly what I know about Buddhism is what I learned from Lisa Simpson. So who knows where you're going to have these outbreaks of suddenly the world is looking at Buddhism, and it's outside of the normal Buddhist channels that we would expect to be doing this kind of work. What happens when a TV show suddenly introduces Buddhism to millions of viewers? Goldie Hawn is an example of Hollywood. Hollywood has become very involved with mindfulness as well. Goldie Hawn grew up as a Jew, and so when people say, "What are you, Goldie?" she says, "Oh, I'm a Jew." She says, "I'm a cultural Jew, but I'm a practicing Buddhist." When she sort of retired from acting, she formed the Goldie Hawn Foundation. The Goldie Hawn Foundation has done remarkable work in taking mindfulness meditation into public schools to grammar school kids. And they have thousands of grammar schools that are practicing meditation, and they have a 15 course unit that they offer to schools to teach the students how to be mindful. And the results of this program are so striking that schools, these are public schools, you would think that people would raise a howl because of saying, but this is a religion coming into our schools. Some years ago, they introduced this idea of mindfulness practice into public schools down in San Diego. It's a fairly conservative place, and you would think that the school board down there would say, no way are you going to do this in our public schools. But the results are so overwhelming for them that the school, many more schools want to have it than there are people to come in and train the people to do it. So that we see with what Goldie Hawn has done, that this mindfulness, now Buddhism begins to show up in public school of all places. there was a wonderful video documentary done, which won a lot of awards, called Room to Breathe, based on her program and some of the results that they were getting from the young students who were learning to practice mindfulness in their public classrooms. And this was particularly based on one school in San Francisco. A problem campus had lots of terrific issues in terms of control of students, performance, a neighborhood with very little parental help for students, the usual things that we often find in places that just make the schools a horrible place for most teachers to go. You have to be a really dedicated person to go into some of these schools where nobody is going to give you much support, where you're going to find that it's really hard to get the attention of the students. It's hard to hold that attention. Many of them are distraught because they're having such terrible problems in their life. Some of them are hungry. Some of them are not getting medical treatment. A whole raft of things. So Goldie Hawn's Foundation went into one of these schools and taught them mindfulness. And this documentary is very moving when you see what happened to that school. It just turned it around, and it's become one of the best in terms of its scores in San Francisco. And the only real thing that changed was her program. In England, it's not just for poor kids. Tunbridge School, Oxford decided to take meditation practice and experiment at Tunbridge. Tunbridge is one of their, what they call a public school. It has prestige. It's where the aristocrats send their boys. It's not quite on a par with Harrow and Eton, but it's, they feel they are. Some say Tunbridge thinks it's the center of the universe. Eton knows it is. So this is the difference between them. Professor Williams from Oxford went there and started using mindfulness training with those boys who come from homes with all the advantages of wealth and prestige and education. Even there, those who followed his program of mindfulness did far better on their scoring than those who did not, significantly better. So even with all of the support that you would get at a place like this, the mindfulness training operated on top of that already high level of development to one degree, took them higher. Mindfulness has worked its way into politics. In the Parliament in Great Britain, they now have a mindfulness group that meets. There are more than 90 members of Parliament who meet regularly to practice some form of mindfulness. They are meditating, is basically what they're doing in Parliament. So you would say, well, those Brits, who could believe it? Well, we have it in the US Congress. Tim Ryan from Ohio has a mindfulness program that attracts up to 100 of our Congress people. And it's done every day that there's a vote. As you know, in the US Congress, we have this strange thing where people talk all day long, and then at 5:30 they vote. They don't vote throughout the day, only at 5:30. So the bell goes off and people go, that's when you have to be there if you're going to vote. So what Ryan does is at 5 o'clock, he has his mindfulness group and he says, before you go in to vote, why don't you come by and practice a little mindfulness? and a lot of people are doing it. And Ryan is out there in the world, and he's saying that we need to teach our people about mindfulness, that it's got so much value in terms of social and emotional health that it should be a national goal to teach mindfulness throughout this country. So it's not just England. The late Goenka, who was a Buddhist who did enormous amount for the Pali Canon, who set up his Vipassana training in India. And what Mr. Goenka did is he went into the Indian police service and started teaching the Indian police to have mindfulness training to calm them down, to help them with their task. So that India, which was the homeland of Buddhism, which had dropped it for the most part for the so-called Hindu tradition, now we began to see the practice of Buddhism. They don't maybe see it so much as Buddhist as a form of yoga, but the Indian police have found it to be helpful enough that hundreds of them participate in it. And not only that, but Goenka went into the prisons, and he had more than 80,000 prisoners who were practicing some form of meditation, Buddhist meditation, Buddhist mindfulness. There was a video produced, a documentary on this called Doing Time, Doing Vipassana. It's a very fine documentary. It was reviewed by Slate magazine that reviews things digital, and one of their main reporters, Gonzalez, looked at it and he said, "I don't believe it. It's not possible that some little simple practice like this could make that much difference to thousands of people who are in such bad situation and such a bad environment. I don't believe it." And I feel that I want to write to him and say, you better believe it, because it's happening in prisons all over the world, and it's happening even with some of the people in this room and some of us who do prison work and introduce Buddhist meditation in the prisons. The difference it makes is enormous. A number of us work with the group I've visited with these people from San Diego, the International Bodhisattva Sangha. We've been visiting 5 prisons they've been doing it for 19 years now. I've only done it for 12 with them, but they just dedicate them to this one task. This is what they do. This is their service to Buddhism, is to teach meditation in these prisons. And when you see the difference that it makes to people after years of practicing in those prisons, it's very impressive. Our California state prisons are like huge factories. They are out in the deserts. They have 5,000 prisoners each usually. There are more than 130,000 men in high security prisons for the state of California alone. And they live in crowded conditions. And you would think if you're in that kind of condition where you're sleeping 3 bunk beds, 3-level bunk beds, how could you have any kind of use for mindfulness? How could you meditate in such an environment? But they do. And we have worked, John is sitting here, he's doing this every week. John, we appreciate all that you do. Stand up and let them get acquainted with you. John is from the University of the West, helping to run the prison visitation program and teaching meditation and classes to prisoners. Change in them, from my own observation, this is what I want to say to Gonzalez. You need to go and see these people before they start meditating and see it after they've been doing it for a while. One of my people that I've known for a long while, he's been meditating for almost 10 years. He's from the Pueblo Indian group, and he was all his life angry, frustrated, acting out, violence, all of these things. And after this long period of meditation, he meditates up to 8 hours a day sometimes. They have time. As they say to me, that's the only thing we own. We don't own anything else, but we have time. When he got quieted down, his family said to him, "What have they done to you? You've gone crazy. They've brainwashed you. You're not you're not our brother. We don't even know who you are. You're crazy." And he said to them, "For the first time in my life, I feel sane." So I want to say to Gonzalez, it really is amazing. It exceeds anything which I had anticipated when I first started getting involved in this. And it's not just California. Of all places, one of the major places for the use of Buddhist meditation in prison is in the state of Alabama. Alabama, which is a very conservative state. Now, they did have problems. The Christians did rise up in the state assembly, and everyone in Alabama said, "Whoa, wait a minute, what is this cultic, strange activities going on in our prisons? Stop it." So they stopped it for a while, and then the warden and the other people in the prison said, "We got to have it back. It made such a difference to the running of this prison that if you take that away from the prisoners, you have nothing to give them in place of it." So they put it back in. There was a very moving documentary made called The Dhamma Brothers. The woman who made this looked at all the letters which those prisoners had written, and she put together a documentary with their statements about what had happened to them and what had gone on, and made this film called The Dhamma Brothers. So Buddhist meditation has shown up in the digital world. It's shown up in Congress, in the House of Parliament, in public schools. Who could have believed that? And it's happening so quietly. It's like we hardly hear of it. You don't get a lot of evidence of this, but when you start seeing the thousands of people who are being involved with this, you realize that it's enormous. So my thought is this: the Buddhist community needs to take this quite seriously. I don't think there has ever been such comparable opportunity for the Buddhists to reach out and touch as many lives as this is making possible. And it's making possible throughout and at all levels of society. So it would be very good, I think, if Buddhist groups could begin to help those people who are doing this by giving them support, by offering to help them, by infusing Buddhist teachings along with the practice. My concern is that you could do this and it could be secular completely. But I think that the issue that came up with Facebook, I thought that the Facebook people got it right. They realized that they could do this form of thing with no talk of anything other than just do this. You'll be a better worker, you'll be more productive. But the head of their engineering service said, you need to infuse one other thing into Facebook and its operation here, and that is compassion. Now that is another step which is beyond just the simple act of sitting and counting your breath. How do you get someone to have this compassion? But he's quite right, because the Buddhists have always said compassion is the test for whether or not your wisdom is working. If your wisdom is working, this is what you're going to feel, is compassion. And so the Facebook people are going ahead and saying, if we are doing it right, we ought to have compassion. And that compassion should show itself in our workforce and in our workplace. And we should begin to deal with it at that level. So I'm just, in these lecture series, I'm trying to look at what's happening in the world. Where is Buddhism in terms of what's going on in the world? And when I look at this mindfulness, it seems to me that this is a significant movement. And it's spreading. Now, it has problems. It is very easy, as I see sometimes on the internet. I've got the answer for you, says the ad. You can be an enlightened Zen person in 5 minutes. You know, just send me some money and you can be an enlightened person. There is no doubt that what something which attracts this much attention is also going to attract a lot of people who should not use it, who have no way to know really how to use it, and just make a business of it. So I think this is where the Buddhist community needs to help identify those places that are doing really significant work with mindfulness in a way which the Buddhists would say, that's right, you're doing it right, that's the way it ought to be. I think that, for example, from my own experiences, I look at what Goldie Hawn's Foundation does. It's fantastic, and it seems to be, it sticks right with the training of Buddhism. Whereas, as I said, if somebody offers you enlightenment in 5 minutes, if you send them money, you could also ask them if they have a bridge for sale. I mean, it's what we face all the time in terms of people who will try to exploit something. And I don't want the exploitation to ruin it, because it is so important and it does so much good and it changes so many lives that we need to protect that part of it which is doing the good and protecting and allowing people to have a new part of their life. So this is my lecture for this morning on mindfulness.